My wife stood in front of the whole family and thanked everyone for their support during her illness, except me. Not a word, not a glance, as if I hadn't been the one sleeping on hospital chairs, missing work, learning how to inject her meds. I smiled through it. But what happened next was rather unbelievable. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Reagan Andrews from London. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. Before everything fell apart, before the speeches, the silence, and the note, I was just a husband trying to do right by the woman I married. My name's Marcus, and I worked in IT for a mid-sized insurance firm. The kind of job where your face doesn't matter, only your ability to keep the system from crashing. I clocked in early, stayed late, and came home to a wife who used to leave the porch light on for me. Her name was Natalie, and when she got sick, I didn't think twice. I stepped up, because that's what you do when love is real, right? You don't count the hours or the sacrifices. You don't write down who did what. You just do it. Or at least that's what I believed back then, before I learned that love without acknowledgement is a slow kind of death. The diagnosis came like a hammer. Ovarian cancer. Stage 2, but aggressive. I remember sitting in that cold, beige hospital room, pretending to understand the words the doctor was throwing at us. Chemo, surgery, immunotherapy. I reached for her hand, and she gripped mine like she was drowning. That was the first time I realized how alone she must have felt in her own body. I promised her right there that I wouldn't leave her side, not once. And I kept that promise, even when it meant sleeping on plastic hospital chairs that turned my back into knots. Even when it meant learning to inject her with medications that made her vomit while I held her hair back. Even when it meant using up all my PTO, then burning through unpaid leave just to be there for every appointment. Every scan. Every sleepless night. Her family came around in the beginning, bringing casseroles, offering to help with errands, sending flowers. But slowly, like most people do, they faded. They had lives. Kids. Jobs. I didn't blame them, not really. But I noticed how Natalie still lit up when her sister called, even if it was just for 5 minutes to check in. I noticed how she'd cry after hanging up, sometimes saying, "I wish they could see me like this." I'd wipe her tears and remind her she didn't have to perform strength for me. I was there. I saw her. Every side of her. The strong, the broken, the angry. I never flinched. I thought that was enough. We developed a rhythm, me and her, in that strange little universe that illness creates. I'd prep her meds at 6 a.m., get her settled with a heated blanket and some herbal tea, then log into work remotely. She'd nap while I answered emails, and I'd break every 2 hours to make sure she'd eaten. The days blurred. Sometimes I forgot what day it even was. I started writing reminders on sticky notes. Wednesday, trash day. Friday, call Dr. Lou. Sunday, tell her she's beautiful. That last one I didn't really need the reminder for, but in a world spinning so fast, even love had to be penciled in just to make sure it didn't get buried under logistics. One night, around month 4, I found her crying on the bathroom floor. She thought I was asleep. I wasn't. I sat beside her and just held her while she said things I'll never forget. "I don't feel like a woman anymore. I miss my hair. I'm scared you'll stop looking at me the same." I didn't have the right words. I just kissed the crown of her head, the parts the chemo hadn't stolen yet, and said, "I'm still here, aren't I?" And she looked at me like that meant everything. Back then, I believed it did. But over time, I started to notice something shift, not in her, but in me. The longer I was invisible to everyone else, the heavier it all became. Friends stopped checking in with me. Coworkers started hinting that I was taking advantage of remote work. Her mom would call and ask how Natalie was doing, but never once asked how I was holding up. I started to feel like a support beam in a house that no one remembered was load-bearing. I was functioning, holding everything up, but slowly cracking inside. And no one noticed. Not even her. I'd lie awake at night next to her, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was selfish for wanting to be seen. Was it petty to want someone, anyone, to say, "You're doing great, Marcus"? I didn't need a parade. I didn't want flowers or gift cards or applause. I just wanted to not feel like a ghost in my own home. Like a pair of hands, a set of wheels, a breathing calendar reminder. I kept telling myself, this isn't about you, but some nights that lie felt like a wool blanket. Heavy, hot, suffocating. I was proud of what I was doing, but pride doesn't tuck you in. It doesn't whisper thank you. It doesn't make you feel like you matter. I remember one particularly brutal week where Natalie had to go through back-to-back treatments. She was weak, barely able to sit up, and I had to carry her to the bathroom. She apologized over and over, sobbing into my shirt, and I kept saying, "Don't be sorry. I've got you." And I did. But 2 days later, her sister posted a photo of herself on vacation with the caption, "Sending love and strength to my brave sister fighting cancer. We're all supporting you." I stared at that post for 10 minutes. Not a single mention of me. No. Thanks to Marcus for being her rock. Nothing. Just emojis and hashtags from people who hadn't even called in months. I clicked off the app and threw my phone across the couch. I didn't say anything to Natalie. What could I say that wouldn't make me sound like I was keeping score? That became my secret. How bitter I was becoming. And bitterness, when it festers in silence, becomes something else. It becomes distance. I wasn't angry at Natalie, not exactly. I was angry at how easy it was for everyone to pretend like I was part of the furniture. Useful, functional, but not worth acknowledging. Even when Natalie had energy again, when she smiled more, walked without help, laughed at old shows, I still felt hollow. Like maybe I'd poured so much of myself into keeping her afloat that there was nothing left of me to hold on to. Still, I clung to the idea that it would all balance out. That someday, when this was behind us, she'd look at me and say, "You saved me." Not in a movie way, but in that raw, quiet way that makes all the broken pieces inside snap back together. I just wanted that moment. That look. That sentence. Something real. Something small but sacred. But I didn't know then that I'd never get it. That everything I did would be seen as expected. Background. Default. I didn't know how much that would change me. And I certainly didn't know that a single family gathering, just a handful of claps and one missing sentence, would be the thing that made me finally walk away. The night everything cracked open, it was supposed to be a celebration. That's what her sister called it in the group text. A little get-together to celebrate Natalie's strength. Just a few close family members, some catered food, soft music, and a toast or two. Nothing extravagant. Natalie was still recovering, still adjusting to her post-treatment body, but she was excited in a way I hadn't seen in months. She wore makeup for the first time in ages, dabbed a little perfume behind her ears, and looked at herself in the mirror with something like recognition. "I feel almost human again," she said, and I kissed her cheek, hiding how tired I was behind a smile. I drove us to her sister's house, hands clenched on the steering wheel. I'd been working overtime remotely to make up for the unpaid leave I'd taken, and I'd barely slept the night before. But I told myself this night wasn't about me. This was about her, Natalie. And maybe, just maybe, it would be a small breath of air after months of drowning. I imagined her family giving her hugs, raising glasses, maybe even pulling me aside for a quiet, "Thank you for everything you did." It wasn't a need exactly, but it would have been nice. Healing, even. I told myself not to expect it, but I still hoped. Her sister's house was glowing with string lights, and a banner that read, "Welcome back, Natalie," hung in the living room. Cousins and aunts hugged her tightly. Her mom teared up, and there was champagne passed around even though Natalie couldn't drink any. I stood back, letting her have her moment. I watched her beam and laugh, her hair starting to come back in soft tufts, and something in my chest loosened. For a moment, I was proud. Genuinely. She'd survived hell, and I'd been there for every inch of it. This night was the light at the end of that long tunnel. Or so I thought. The moment that changed everything started so small, I almost missed it. Her sister tapped a glass with a fork and said, "Let's take a moment to honor the strongest woman I know." Everyone quieted. Natalie stood at the front of the room, smiling, hands clasped together. I felt a flutter in my chest, like this is it. She's going to acknowledge it all. The pain, the fight, us. I didn't expect a speech about me. I just expected the truth. She started by thanking her mom for all the late-night prayers. Then her sister. for the grocery deliveries, and for being the glue of this family. Her coworker, Sandra, got a shout out for covering shifts and sending care packages. Even the neighbor, George, got mentioned for mowing the lawn that one time without being asked. People clapped after every name. Nods, smiles, affirmations. And I stood there, frozen, waiting for mine. It didn't come. She kept going, her voice strong, her eyes scanning the crowd, but never once landing on me. She ended with, "I wouldn't be here without all of you. Truly, thank you for loving me back to life." Applause erupted. People hugged her. Her sister cried. I just stood there, my hands clenching tighter around the untouched glass of sparkling cider I'd been holding for 30 minutes. I didn't smile. I didn't clap. I couldn't. I felt the floor fall out from under me without a sound. I went through the motions. Posed for a few pictures. Nodded when people complimented my strength for standing by her. One uncle even patted my back and said, "You must be proud of her." I wanted to say proud? I'm barely standing. But instead I just smiled thinly and said, "Yeah, very proud." Because what else could I do? Make a scene? Cry in front of her family? Demand recognition like a child? No, I'd already learned how to swallow pain in silence. Tonight wasn't going to be any different. The drive home was unbearably quiet. She was still buzzing from the energy of it all, recounting every conversation, every compliment. "Did you hear what my cousin said? That I looked 10 years younger." I nodded, eyes on the road. She didn't notice I hadn't said more than 10 words all night. Or maybe she noticed and chose not to ask. That hurt more somehow, that she could live in that glow without even checking if I was in the shadow. I realized then that I wasn't her anchor anymore. I'd become invisible again, not by accident, but by design. When we got home, she slipped out of her heels and sighed. "God, that was perfect." I mumbled something like, "Yeah, glad it went well," and went to the kitchen to pour myself a drink. Water, nothing stronger. I needed clarity, not comfort. She called out from the bedroom, "You okay?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted to say, "You didn't thank me," but the words died in my throat. I just said, "Yeah, just tired." Later that night, after she fell asleep, I stood at the foot of the bed for a long time, watching her breathe, thinking about the hospital nights, the vomit, the injections, the 911 call that nearly broke me. I thought about the time I cried in the parking lot because I couldn't afford another missed paycheck and still chose to stay with her anyway. I thought about every time I lied to my boss, saying I had COVID again, just to buy her one more day of care. And I thought about that room. Those clapping hands, those smiling faces, and her voice skipping over my name like it didn't belong. I packed my bag slowly, quietly. Just the essentials. A duffel bag, a couple changes of clothes, toiletries. I didn't want to wake her. I wasn't angry. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was just done being unseen. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Just one sentence. I read it over twice before walking out. "You thanked everyone you needed. So now, let them keep you alive." I closed the door behind me without slamming it. Drove into the night without looking back. The freeway was empty, and the world felt quiet in a way it hadn't in months. I didn't know where I was going. Motel, friend's couch, maybe even the car for a night. I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding anyone else's weight. And for once, the silence felt like mine. I didn't cry. That's what people always assume when you walk out on someone you still love. That there must have been sobbing, hesitation, maybe even regret as the door clicked shut. But there wasn't. Not for me. I was emptied out long before that final night. Walking away from Natalie wasn't some impulsive act of pain. It was the only logical conclusion after months of watching my existence be reduced to a utility. I had already grieved the loss of us while standing beside her bed, while folding her laundry, while holding her hand in waiting rooms where the air smelled like antiseptic and hopelessness. By the time I wrote that note, my heart wasn't breaking. It was finally, mercifully still. I drove for hours with no destination, just silence, headlights, and the faint hum of the radio playing songs I didn't recognize. I turned it off eventually. Too many lyrics about love and returning home. I couldn't stomach the irony. I ended up at a motel just off Route 12. One of those cheap places with peeling wallpaper and sheets that smell faintly of bleach and cigarettes. I handed the clerk my ID and credit card without making eye contact, then collapsed onto the hard mattress like my body had finally given itself permission to stop pretending I was okay. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't toss and turn either. I just stared at the ceiling until sunrise, watching the shadows shift and thinking about all the ways silence had become my mother tongue. The next morning, I turned off my phone before it had a chance to ring. I didn't want to hear the voicemails. I knew they'd come, probably from her sister first, furious, defensive, accusing me of abandoning Natalie at her most vulnerable. Maybe her mom next, trying to be the peacemaker, saying things like, "This isn't like you, Marcus," or "She didn't mean to hurt you." I didn't need to hear it. I'd spent too long listening to voices that never once asked how I felt. I left the phone in the drawer and stared out the dusty window instead, letting the silence stretch like a bomb over my frayed nerves. By the second day, my absence must have hit home. I imagined her waking up and realizing I was gone. The note would have been sitting right where I left it, next to the fruit bowl she never used and the vitamins I'd lined up every morning. Maybe she read it right away. Maybe she stared at it for hours. Maybe she crumpled it. I didn't care. I wrote it for me, not for her. It was the only honest thing I'd said in months. You thanked everyone you needed. So now, let them keep you alive. I wasn't trying to be cruel, but I needed her to understand something that words in real time had failed to communicate. That by overlooking me, not just in that speech, but for months, she had made a choice. A choice to see me as part of the machinery that got her from pain to recovery, but not as a man with a breaking point. I had given up sleep, health, pride, career opportunities, all of it without a second thought. But that didn't mean I didn't need to be seen, to be held, to be told, even once, "You matter too." On the third night, I got a call from an old college friend, James. He'd seen something vague on Natalie's sister's Facebook, some dramatic post about people walking out when things get hard. He asked if I was okay. I almost laughed. Now someone was asking. I told him I was fine, that I just needed space. He offered his guest room without hesitation, and I took it. Not because I couldn't afford the motel, but because I was tired of the echoes in that stale room. I needed a human voice that didn't carry guilt in it. James didn't pry. That's what I appreciated most. He handed me a beer, turned on the game, and let me sit in silence until I was ready to speak. And when I did, I didn't sugarcoat it. I told him everything. The sleepless nights, the thankless days, the speech, the note. He listened quietly, then nodded and said something I'll never forget. "Man, sometimes people only notice the oxygen when it's gone." That line stuck with me. I'd been oxygen for too long, essential, invisible, taken for granted. The voicemails finally caught up to me on day 5. I turned my phone back on just long enough to hear them. The first few were exactly what I expected. Her sister yelling, accusing me of being dramatic, of making Natalie feel abandoned. Her mom's voice came next, softer but no less manipulative. "She didn't mean it that way, Marcus. You know how hard this has been for her." Yes, I thought. I do. I know exactly how hard it's been. I lived it too. But then came the message that made me pause. Natalie's voice. Quiet, shaky, unsteady in a way I hadn't heard since the early days of her diagnosis. "Marcus, I don't know if you'll even listen to this, but I read your note. And I'm sorry. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't forget you. I didn't. I didn't want to cry in front of them. I thought if I talked about you, what you did, I wouldn't be able to hold it together. You were everything. And I didn't know how to say it right." I replayed that voicemail more times than I'll admit. Not because it changed anything, but because it complicated everything. Her words weren't enough to undo what I felt, but they dug up something I wasn't ready to feel. Grief. Real grief. Not for her health, but for us. For what we were. For what I thought we could be after she got better. I had imagined a life where we survived the worst and came out stronger. But some silences leave bruises that never fully fade. And some things, once left unsaid, become impossible to hear again even when spoken. James asked me that night if I planned to go back. I told him I didn't know. I was still sorting through it. Part of me wanted to march back into that house and scream everything I'd swallowed for a year. Another part wanted to stay in that guest room forever, safe from the weight of being needed without gratitude. What I knew for sure was this. I wasn't going back to the way things were. If there was a conversation to be had, it would be on my terms. I wasn't her nurse anymore. I wasn't her shadow. If she wanted to talk, she'd have to see me first. And maybe, just maybe, that would finally make a difference. The thing about silence is, it doesn't stay still. It starts as relief, a breath you've held too long finally released. But after a few days, it shifts. It becomes questions echoing off the walls. It becomes memory playing in loops, and eventually, it becomes noise of its own. By the time the first week passed, the quiet I had craved turned into a restless hum in my chest, like something unfinished was trying to claw its way out. I hadn't talked to Natalie. Not once. But I'd listened to her voicemail so many times. I knew every tremble in her voice. Every pause. Every regret hidden behind words too little, too late. Staying at James's place was easy. Comfortable, even. He didn't ask too much. He kept his guest room stocked with clean towels, a decent mattress, and snacks I didn't have the appetite for. Most nights, we watched basketball or reruns of old shows we used to love in college. It felt like stepping into an old version of myself. Someone with less responsibility, fewer scars, someone who laughed without the weight of sacrifice hanging off every breath. But no matter how much I tried to stay present, there was a nagging pull behind my ribs. A sense that something had snapped and I hadn't yet faced the full cost. Then came the text from her. Just one line. "Can we talk? Please." I stared at it for 20 minutes, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I typed out a dozen responses, deleted every single one. What could I even say that hadn't already been scrawled in silence and sweat in a note left beside a fruit bowl? I didn't answer. I needed to think, not just about her, but about who I had become over the last year. About the parts of me that had withered under the pressure of being everything to someone who forgot I existed when it mattered most. Later that night, her sister posted again, this time not vague. She went full public. A Facebook post laced with venom. Imagine abandoning someone after everything they've been through. Cowards don't deserve second chances. My sister deserves better. The comments were worse. People who barely knew me threw their opinions into the fire. What kind of man walks away when the worst is over? She needs real support, not someone who dips when it's not about them. I didn't comment, didn't respond, but it burned. Because none of them had been there at 3 a.m. when she couldn't stop throwing up and I had to carry her to the shower. None of them had wiped her tears or held the basin or driven 2 hours in traffic to pick up a medication her doctor forgot to call in. None of them knew a damn thing. I hadn't planned to respond at all until I got the second voicemail. Different tone this time. No trembling, no guilt, just tiredness. "Marcus, I understand now. I don't like it, but I understand. If you never want to speak to me again, I get it. I was selfish. I was focused on surviving, and I didn't see what it was doing to you. I didn't thank you because I thought you already knew. And maybe that's the worst part. I took your love for granted because it was so constant. I'm sorry. I really am. But if you do want to talk, I'll be home Sunday night." I listened to it 3 times, sitting in James's garage with a cold drink sweating in my palm. Something inside me softened. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. She wasn't defending herself anymore. She wasn't blaming me. She had finally stopped trying to package my pain into something palatable. And maybe that was the first honest thing between us in months. I still didn't know what I wanted to say, but I knew I had to go back. Not to return, not to make things whole, but to finish the conversation we never got to have while we were too busy surviving. Sunday came and I drove slowly, like every mile closer to our house made the air heavier. The driveway looked the same. So did the porch light, still automatic, still useless in the daylight. I stood at the door for a minute before knocking. She opened it fast, like she'd been waiting with her hand on the knob. She looked thinner, paler. Her eyes were puffy, and her voice cracked when she said, "Hey." I stepped inside, and for the first time, I didn't feel like it was mine anymore. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where I used to prep her medication, line up her pills, label syringes. Now it was just wood and silence, and 2 people who didn't know where to start. "Finally," she said, "I read the note every day." I nodded. "It wasn't meant to hurt you," I said. "It was just the truth. You thanked everyone who made you feel seen, and I wasn't one of them." She swallowed hard. I didn't think I had to thank you. You were there. Always. Every moment. It felt like breathing. You don't thank your lungs every time they work. I let out a small, bitter laugh. But when your lungs stop working, you notice. Her eyes welled up. I noticed. Just not soon enough. She reached across the table, but I didn't move. I wasn't ready for that. I needed words, not touch. I lost myself taking care of you, I said slowly. And when you got better, I thought maybe I'd get a little of me back. But instead, I watched you thank everyone else. I stood in a room full of applause, and I felt like a stranger in my own life. She nodded, tears slipping down her face. You're right. You were more than I deserved. I don't know how to fix that. I looked away, blinking back my own. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's not about fixing anything. She asked if I hated her. I told her no. I couldn't. But I couldn't go back either. Not to the version of us that existed before. I loved you, I said. Still do, probably. But I love myself too now. And I don't want to disappear again. Not for anyone. She whispered, I understand. And for the first time, I believed her. I stood to leave. She didn't ask me to stay. Didn't beg. Just said, thank you for everything. And I'm sorry. I nodded and walked out. The air felt cooler than when I arrived. Lighter. I didn't know what came next. But for once, the silence felt earned. I didn't rush to see her again. After that conversation at the kitchen table, something inside me had settled. Maybe not healed, but settled, like silt at the bottom of a river that had been raging for too long. I went back to James's place that night, and though I barely slept, my heart wasn't thudding against my ribs the way it used to. I wasn't haunted by what I hadn't said or what I should have done. I had spoken plainly. I had been seen, finally, and that alone gave me more peace than anything I'd felt in over a year. The following weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. I went back to work, part-time at first, then gradually built back to full-time. My coworkers welcomed me back with that awkward mix of politeness and curiosity, not sure whether to ask how I'd been or ignore the gaping emotional wound they could sense, but not name. I didn't give them the details. I just smiled and said, taking things one day at a time. It became my shield, my new script. The truth was, I still carried all of it with me. Every overnight yard visit, every time I held Natalie while she sobbed in the dark, every moment I waited for someone to acknowledge I existed too. It was all still there, just quieter now, folded neatly in the corner of my mind where I stored things too heavy to hold all day. Natalie didn't reach out again after our talk. Not directly. But I heard things, through James, through mutual friends, even through a nurse at the clinic where I'd taken her once. She's been quiet, one of them said. Different. I didn't ask for more. I didn't want to open that door unless I was ready to walk through it, and I wasn't. Not yet. I needed time to figure out who I was outside of being her caretaker. Outside of being the dependable, invisible man who always showed up and never asked for anything in return. Then one afternoon, about a month later, I got a message from James while I was grocery shopping. Just 4 words. You should visit her. I stood frozen in the canned goods aisle, reading those words over and over like they held a hidden meaning. I didn't respond right away. I finished shopping, went home, cooked dinner I barely touched, and stared at the TV for hours without registering what was on. By midnight, I finally replied. Why? His answer came fast. Because she's not the same. And neither are you. Closure's a door. Doesn't close itself. I sat with that for days. Not because I needed convincing, but because I didn't trust what I'd find if I went back. I wasn't afraid of her falling apart. I'd seen that already. I was afraid of seeing something worse. A version of her that had moved on, untouched by my absence. If I walked back into that house and found that my leaving had barely made a ripple, I didn't know if I could survive that. Because for all the pain I'd endured, there was still a part of me that wanted to matter. Not as a function, not as a provider, but as me. The day I finally returned, the weather was gray and humid, like the sky was holding something back. I pulled into the driveway slowly, as if the ground itself might reject me. The porch looked the same, worn, familiar. But the flowers I'd planted in spring were gone, replaced with potted succulents that didn't need much care. That alone hit harder than I expected. I stood at the front door, took a breath, and knocked. No butterflies, no panic, just a quiet readiness to finish what had been started. She opened the door slowly. No makeup, no forced smile. Just Natalie, as she was. Her eyes were softer than I remembered. She looked smaller somehow. Less guarded, more human. "Hey," she said. I nodded. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside and let me in without a word. The living room was tidy, but lived in. The couch still had the same throw blanket I used to tuck around her legs when she got cold. The coffee table held a half-read book and an empty mug. It looked like someone trying to live again, one page at a time. We sat, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile. It wasn't even heavy. It was just there, like a third person in the room. Eventually, she said, "I'm glad you came." I looked at her, really looked, and said, "I wasn't sure I would." She nodded. "I wouldn't have blamed you if you didn't." Her voice had changed. It didn't have that practiced warmth anymore, the kind she used to wear like armor when people visited during treatment. This was real, raw, something she hadn't shown me in a long time. "I've been in therapy," she said, "since you left." I didn't respond, just waited. My therapist asked me to list the people who saved my life. I wrote down names, my mom, my sister, doctors, and then I realized I hadn't written yours. And I hated myself for that. I looked away, throat tightening. "You can't undo it, Natalie." She nodded. "I know, but I needed to say it. You were the reason I made it through most days. And not just because of the medicine or the meals. You made me feel safe. And I treated that like it would never run out." Her words landed with the weight of something long overdue. I didn't interrupt. I let her speak, let her sit in the truth without trying to tidy it up. "I didn't just forget to thank you," she continued. "I think I avoided it. Because if I looked at you, really looked, I'd see everything I made you carry. And I wasn't ready to face that kind of guilt. So I buried it. I buried you." For the first time since I left, I felt the tears come, not a flood, just a quiet leak from somewhere deep. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and said, "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I stopped recognizing myself." She nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I know, and I don't expect you to come back. I needed to make sure you knew I see it now. All of it." We sat in that truth for a long while. No apologies could fix it. No speech could erase what had been broken. But there was something redemptive about the moment. Something in how we both allowed ourselves to hurt out loud for the first time. She asked if I was okay now. I told her I was learning to be. I didn't say yes. Because healing isn't a place you arrive at. It's a road you walk, every day, choosing not to turn around. When I left, she didn't try to stop me. She just walked me to the door, looked at me with eyes that finally held understanding, and said, "Thank you, Marcus, for everything, even for leaving." I nodded. "Take care of yourself, Natalie." Then I walked back to my car, the sky opening up just enough to let the first drops of rain fall. I didn't run. I let the rain hit my face, wash over me like a quiet kind of absolution. It's strange how peace doesn't arrive with fanfare. It slips in quietly, like the last guest at a party who doesn't need to be seen. After the visit with Natalie, I didn't go home and collapse into some dramatic emotional release. I didn't cry into my pillow or down a bottle of something bitter. I just sat in my car for a long while, watching the rain bead and slide down the windshield, and breathed. A real breath, deep, grounding mine. It was the first time in over a year that I felt like I wasn't bracing for impact. The storm hadn't passed, not entirely, but for the first time, I wasn't standing in the middle of it with no umbrella. I was out of it. Drenched, yes. Weathered, but alive. I moved out of James's place a week later. Got my own apartment across town. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom on the third floor with creaky floors and a view of the grocery store parking lot. But it was mine. I picked out my own dishes. Bought throw pillows I actually liked. Chose a bed that didn't remind me of hospitals or guest rooms. I filled the space slowly, deliberately, with things that belonged only to me. No shared drawers. No pill organizers. No looming silence pregnant with expectation. Just me and the sound of a fan at night, humming like a lullaby for a man finally learning how to sleep again. My days found rhythm again. I worked regular hours. I started cooking for myself. Real meals, not just microwave leftovers. I even joined a gym. Not to transform, but to remember what it felt like to move my body for reasons that had nothing to do with crisis. The first time I ran a mile without feeling winded, I sat in the locker room afterward, not triumphant, but quietly proud. Progress came in small, unphotogenic wins. Clean laundry folded on time, a balanced budget, 8 hours of sleep uninterrupted by panic or dread. I didn't post about it. I didn't need applause. I just wanted something steady. And for the first time in a long time, I had it. Natalie and I didn't speak again, not after that day. She didn't call, didn't text. I didn't either. There was no hostility in our silence. No lingering bitterness. Just two people who had run the length of something sacred and bruising and had reached its natural end. Occasionally, I'd wonder how she was. If her health was holding. If her hair had grown back. If she'd found a new rhythm of her own. I hoped she had. I truly did. But that hope didn't come with a pull to re-enter her life. Some stories don't need sequels. Some people, even the ones we love, are only meant to walk with us part of the way. The fallout wasn't all internal. Word got around, as it does. Her sister blocked me on everything. No surprise there. A few of Natalie's friends unfollowed me online, sent vague posts about abandonment and true colors. I didn't engage. I didn't correct the narrative. Because those people had only ever seen the final page of our book. They hadn't read the long, aching chapters full of sacrifices made in silence, of nights I held her while feeling invisible, of mornings I brewed coffee with trembling hands because sleep had become a luxury I couldn't afford. I had lived the story. They could speculate about the ending all they wanted. My mother, surprisingly, was the first to say what I needed to hear. She called a few weeks after I moved and asked if she could visit. We sat on my small balcony, drinking tea, and she said, "I didn't understand at first. I was angry you left her. But then I realized you didn't leave her. You returned to yourself." I didn't respond right away. Just nodded. Let the words land. Let them fill a part of me that had long gone hollow. She reached across and took my hand. The same hand that had held Natalie through chemo and surgeries and quiet despair, and gave it a squeeze. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I didn't realize how much I needed that until it broke me open. Healing wasn't linear. Some nights still brought dreams I didn't want. Sometimes I'd hear a certain song, or smell her old shampoo on someone passing by, and I'd be back in that hospital chair, back in that kitchen writing a note I didn't want to write but had to. There were moments I questioned myself, moments I wondered if love should have been stronger, longer, louder. But then I'd remember the version of me who walked into that party and clapped while everyone else got credit for a battle I fought on the front lines. I'd remember the man who left, not out of spite, but out of necessity. And I'd remind myself that staying isn't always love. Sometimes leaving is. A few months later, I ran into someone who knew her, an old co-worker of Natalie's who spotted me at a cafe. She asked how I was. I gave the usual, polite smile and said, "Doing better." She nodded, then said, "She's doing okay too. She's volunteering at the clinic now." I said nothing, just smiled. That night, I sat in my apartment and thought about what that meant. Volunteering, giving something back. Maybe she'd learned. Maybe she was healing too. And that was enough. I didn't need a follow-up call or a grand reconciliation. I just needed to know that she'd carried forward something real from what we'd gone through. Even if all it ever became was a lesson. I never rewrote the note I left her. I thought about sending her a message one day saying, "I don't hate you." But it felt unnecessary. That one sentence I left behind. You thanked everyone you needed. So now, let them keep you alive. Wasn't about punishing her. It was about drawing a line. A line between martyrdom and dignity. Between loyalty and self-erasure. And as painful as it was, I stood by it. I still do. Now my days are quiet. And I like them that way. I've started writing again, journaling, mostly. Letting my thoughts exist without judgment. I keep a plant on my windowsill. It's nothing special, just a snake plant. Resilient. Low maintenance. But alive. Every time I water it, I think about how long it took me to start doing the same for myself. Some people wait too long. Some never do. But me? I caught it just in time. If you've ever felt invisible in the very relationship where you gave the most, this story was for you. Sometimes love isn't loud. It's quiet, consistent, and taken for granted. But when you reach the point where silence becomes survival, walking away isn't abandonment. It's self-respect. If this story spoke to something real inside you, tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you've ever had to leave to be seen, you're not alone. Subscribe for more real stories like this, where the hardest decisions often become the most freeing. See you soon in the next story.